All right. Good morning, sophomores. As we continue on, moving down the Cold War, trying to get to that. You think Cold War? I think JFK. I think this time period in the '60s. Why? The Cold War. It's all about the tension between the Soviets and the United States, and there's no more tension than during this time. Whether it's going to be the Bay of Pigs, the Berlin Wall, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, it is a constant stress test going on between these two countries during this time. So. This is to me, the epitome of the Cold War and what goes on during this time. So, learning targets today as I can. First of all, identify the impact of TV on culture and politics. So, one of the huge parts here is the change in our way of kind of taking on news or consuming our media. And we're changing that also in modern day. Here, we're talking about television. And we're going to talk about how Kennedy beats Richard Nixon in the election for the presidency here due to television. And it has a lot to do with modern day where President Obama comes up through, a lot of times gets benefit from his election due to the use of social media early on. President Trump, another social media guy, sometimes avoiding media by putting out his own Twitter and video posts there. So the way we consume media and getting the things out and the impact on that is definitely is changing here in the '60s with that. And then obviously the second one, I can describe how the early Cold War came to a head during the Kennedy administration. Like I said, this is the epitome of the Cold War here: Bay of Pigs, Berlin Wall fight, Cuban Missile Crisis. So hang on, we're gonna have a lot of tension this time and talk about some exciting things: CIA, covert overthrows, all sorts of things going on here. All right. To start off with, though, is some of the most fascinating to me is the impact of TV. And again, impact of media today, how we consume information by just reading hot bits and clips and not getting the full information and all that kind of things. It's the same thing here. TV is changing the way. So TV is now becoming the mainstream way of consuming information. It's taking place at the radio at the time in most houses. As I said, after the 50s and 60s, TVs become that item that people are wanting to have, and they are starting to get into every household. And so as we do this, TV kind of changes. And what happens here is during the presidential election between President Kennedy and President Nixon, and now we're coming off President Eisenhower, who's a Republican. Nixon was a Republican also. So Eisenhower had stepped down after 8 years, but he's following there. President Kennedy is the Democrat running. And they're coming here and they're having obviously the debates during this presidential election. Now, what happens is TV really changes people's opinions because now you get to visually see. And we have President JFK, who was the second youngest running for president in U.S. history at the time, behind Teddy Roosevelt, young guy, his 40s, running for president, good looking, vibrant, young. And people are seeing this, and then we see Nixon. And the visuals on TV, people don't realize, but it's the body language. People look, how people act, talk, and the confidence and so forth. And so what we see was interesting. They figure out as they have these debates that when the people that watched it on TV, JFK crushed it on TV. The people that listened to it on radio thought Nixon won. And so it's all about the image and being there. Anyways, the TV comes the mainstream. Kennedy's on there. Women are like, man, look at him. And young families, they feel like we're not having an old president now. We're changing a little bit, having somebody that can relate to us and so forth. There's a lot of things going on. Civil rights movements going on at the same time too, which we'll come back to, talk about Martin Luther King and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot going on, but anyways, the TV gets to be very important in getting that across and getting JFK elected over Nixon, who becomes president later on. As I said there, the civil rights movement, not only do we have the Cold War going on at this time and dealing with what issues we do there, we also have a civil rights issue going on. And like I said, the 60s was a turbulent, fascinating time here during this time. And MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., is arrested during a sit-in during this debate and coming in. Nixon tries to take what a lot of politicians do and take a no public stance, tries not to, kind of push off either side from voting for him. And JFK does the opposite. He reaches out to Dr. King, through his brother, Robert Kennedy, who secures MLK's release on bail. And he kind of gets huge benefits from people from the North, but he also barely wins the election because he loses a lot of Southern Democrat support because of helping Martin Luther King. And obviously, even though they're Democrats in the South, the civil rights and the Jim Crow laws and all the segregation, all those things are pretty close. So he loses quite a bit there from the Southern Democrats. But either way, JFK gets elected, and it changes the United States quite a bit drastically. You see the election results of 1860 there, where Kennedy dominates some of the big states early on there, especially the Northeast, which a lot of the population is living right now. You have New York, you have, Pennsylvania is very high there. And actually, I think this was one of the last times that Ohio lost an election, that they vote for Nixon but actually lose the election because Ohio has gone crazy number of elections by picking the right one. That's why it's considered a swing state. But you see how that is changed there. But you see in the South there, in Alabama and Mississippi, how those are typically at this time still Southern Democrat or sort of Democratic votes. Now today that'd be dead red Republican area, and you see it switching over there a little bit between the two. In fact, a third party guy named Byrd gains the votes there, split between the two. But you see Georgia was going with Kennedy, Texas, Louisiana. Those states are all dead red Republican today. But if you see out there, California was Republican, and that's a dead Democrat state today. So things have changed quite a bit. All right, so Kennedy comes in. Now, coinciding with all this, now think about what Kennedy has to take on. He's taking on the Civil Rights Movement with the MLK. He's taking on the Cold War. And just off the coast of Florida in 1959, Cuba comes in and becomes a communist. So right before JFK comes into power in 1960, Fidel Castro, Communist Party, takes over Cuba. And Cuba obviously allies with the Soviet Union. So JFK comes in 1960 and inherits a plan that was starting to be put in place by Eisenhower because of brinkmanship and his more aggressive ways of thinking because he's a general. Inherits a plan that has not been put into place quite yet, but it's going to put in place right away when Kennedy comes in, and it's called the Bay of Pigs. So obviously, the United States did not want communism spreading anywhere, especially in the Western Hemisphere, which they are supposed to be the king and dominate. And here you are, having a country coming in and being a communist just 100 miles off the coast of Florida. So JFK's young, he's new to the presidency. They come in, the generals, the four-star generals come in, and they put this plan that was okayed by Eisenhower but not put into place yet during this time, saying, hey, we want to get Castro out of there. We need to go in, hit hard, invade, led by the CIA, not by the army, but the CIA-trained coverts, along with some Cuban people that are fighting back against Castro. We'll come in, we'll take him out quickly, take hold of Cuba, build it back up, and we are good to go. And it was supposed to be no big deal. This is Cuba. It's a small island. This shouldn't be any big problem. And if you guys remember going back to the Spanish-American War, the United States had a footprint on Cuba because of remember, Cuba was actually a little bit of a protector of the United States, but we kept a little bit of area. We still have it today called it's a prison, military prison. Now I forget. I apologize, but it'll come to me in a second. But anyways, so we have a military prison base there on Cuba, and so we have some things there. But the Bay of Pigs goes wrong. It's a mistake. It makes JFK look foolish early on. He's upset. Cuba tightens its grip with the Soviet Union and gets really more worried about, kind of mistrusting the United States, and things really go bad from the Bay of Pigs. It doesn't happen. Fidel Castro stays in power. Of course, he stayed in power for 50 years. But it's a bad deal going on there. And Soviet Union and Cuba comes closer and closer together. Now, at the same time as this, the Soviets sees the failure of Bay of Pigs as a sign of U.S. weakness. Like, how could you not get this right? It was just a little island, and you couldn't even overthrow Fidel Castro over there. So the Soviet Union decides, we're going to press. We think Kennedy's weak, and we think the United States is weak now, and we lost Eisenhower, and a general. Now we got this Kennedy, and we don't think he's quite the same guy. He's not pushing as strong. So the Soviet Union begins to press more control over Berlin. If you remember, Berlin is the city in the middle of East Germany. We divided Germany in half: West Germany, East Germany. East Germany is controlled by the Soviets, West Germany by the United States. Berlin is also supposed to be cut in half also, but it lies within East Germany. So it's very difficult. There's only one road in and out that the people, for the West Germans and the United States and the Allies like British can use. And you see in this picture there with kind of the bear hugging around it, and you see the one road in. So what the Soviets do, they come in and they build a wall around West Berlin. And U.S. remains committed to West Berlin and tries to make sure that we stay supporting West Berliners. And JFK delivers his famous Ich bin ein Berliner speech to a crowd of 450,000 that called the Berlin Wall a sign of communist failure. Okay? So here's what, I don't have a picture here, but here's what happens. The Soviet Union built a wall right through Berlin, all around their side of East Berlin, keeping West Berliners out. Now, according to the Soviet Union, they're building this wall to keep West Berliners out from going to East Berlin. According to, obviously, JFK, a sign of the communist failure, they are building this wall to keep East Berliners from leaving to go to West Berlin. Either way, this is called the Berlin Wall, and it's going to land right down. I mean, it cut Berlin right in half. Guard posts put up around the entire area. There's only one road in and out of West Berlin now. You cannot cross. If family lives on the East Berlin side and West Berlin side, they don't see each other anymore. You cannot cross this wall. This is a 20-foot tall brick concrete wall put up with guard posts and guns pointed at you. And it was splitting Berlin in two. So this is going to be a situation where this is going to bring lots of tension to this Cold War again. JFK's flexible response policies also created this time saying the U.S. could respond to a variety of aggression and develop non-nuclear options to avoid mutual assured destruction when we talk about those weapons. So more tension building elsewhere over there in Berlin, and that was, Berlin's going to be the center of the Cold War, and this Berlin Wall is the symbol complete of the Cold War and how it divides East versus West. Finally, let's get back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Go back to Cuba again, because this is what we're going to be watching. As I said, this is the epitome of the Cold War, the 60s time period. It comes to the biggest tension. We had the Bay of Pigs. We had the Berlin Wall being built and stressing out those tensions. And the United States trying to figure out how to, every time you try to react to the Soviets, they build a wall, do whatever. You want to do it. You want to say we're strong. You want to look strong, but you don't want to drop any bombs because we lead to mutual assured destruction. So we got to figure out every time we respond how to do that. And we'll see that in the movie 13 Days, how he goes through, President Kennedy goes through decisions of how to react to the Soviets without ever getting into nuclear war. And that's the tightrope that they walk. So Cuban Missile Crisis. So what happens here? Cuba begins to bring in Soviet missiles into Cuba. All right, so they're becoming allies, they're becoming tight, and they get hooked up with the Soviet Union and say, hey, the Soviets say, hey, if we could bring in some missiles into Cuba, we're only 100 miles off the coast of the United States. We can point these suckers and have launch capability to almost hit any city in the United States. And this would give them a huge advantage over the United States, obviously, because they are that close and have missiles pointed at us. So whenever we will do something or respond in aggression or whatever, they have the ability to attack us very, very quickly and can hit us. One of the big things was being able to attack both mainlands because we're so far apart from each other. So now, during some routine surveillance by the U-2s, which we'll see a clip of this in the 13 Days movie, the U.S. Are able to detect some Soviet missiles being put in. And you see that's a picture of one of the U-2s that was taken there in the flybys or the surveillance of Cuba. And they go, whoa, whoa, and they are shocked. They had no idea that the Soviets were secretly sailing in missiles, which are going to be nuclear missiles, nuclear launch capability, into Cuba and trying to make them operational. And we're going to see where we have now some things going on. The military, the general, Joint Chief of Staff are going to say, hey, we need a U.S. airstrike and invade Cuba right now. We need to go to war. We need to get these things out of there. Kennedy's going to try to figure out how to do it without going to war. And there's a whole lot of tension. This is the 13 days that the United States and Kennedy are going to try to figure out how do we can't have a gun to our head. And that's what these missile sites are going to be 100 miles off. It's like putting a gun to our head in the United States. And we have to get that away. We have to take it out. And how do we do that without going to mutual assured destruction or nuclear war? So we're going to see that play out, the decisions that had to be made, the tightroping, the communication, which is not going to be direct communication. It's going to be back channel. It's going to be signals back and forth, different things. It's going to be trying to read what the other or think what the other one's thinking, and how all this is going to be going on. It's going to be believing in intelligence. What's going to happen? Is your intelligence that you're getting your information real or not real? Is it fake? Is it try to double cross you? Is it trying to get you to do something? All of these things are going to try to happen. By the way, I just remembered what the Cuban military base is called. Guantanamo Bay. I couldn't think of that earlier. Guantanamo Bay, which is a U.S. military base on Cuba that is there still at this time. That's, like I said, we have a little foothold there. Anyways, back to this. The Soviet Union sent some clashing letters to the United States, which we're going to see in the 13 days. One said the Soviets would remove missiles if U.S. pledged to never invade Cuba. The other one said Soviet demanded removal of U.S. missiles from Turkey, which we have defense missiles in Turkey. But here we're dealing with terrorist kind of ideas. We're dealing with negotiations. You don't ever want to back down from somebody. You don't want to trade one thing for another because you always want to look strong and the aggressor. It's a negotiations that is going to be put the United States literally within minutes of a possible nuclear attack. And this is not just it being over-exaggerated. This is actually what happens. And we are that close to things going on and the United States attacking Cuba too. So the Soviets eventually backed down, and to try to avoid any of this miscommunication and problems, the U.S. and the Soviet Union put a hotline in, a red phone with a direct line back and forth between Moscow and the Kremlin and Washington, D.C. and the White House. We also put in a limited nuclear test ban treaty also because nuclear weapons were being tested at the same time, which was sending out mixed signals. So, all right, that is the end of the notes. We're going to watch 13 days then for the rest of the week. Like I said, you're going to see a lot of this what's going to be happening. It's 13 really tense days that come out of nowhere, this crisis that begins to happen, and we got to figure our way out without just blowing the world up. And it's a tightrope act. It's to try to figure out what each side is saying, what they're doing, and I think you'll enjoy the movie. So make sure to watch the movie, and then you have till Sunday to do that, plus finish the handout that goes along with it and submit that. All right? You got a reading guide to finish up. We're learning a little bit more about all these tensions to do today, and then 13 days the rest of the week. All right. We'll see you next week. If you have any questions, please email me. Thanks a lot.